Good evening. My name is Agnieszka Bryc. I am from Nicolaus Copernicus University, and on behalf of Krakow's Jewish Culture Festival, I am really impressed with our today's guest. It's a privilege to host Avi Jorisch, or Jorisch.
Jorisch. Very well done, Agnieszka. Very well done.
Yes,
It's a pleasure
well
to be here
done.
with you, and thank you for hosting me at this festival. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, we are going to talk with Avi about his latest book, which in my private and very private opinion is going to be one of the the most inspiring book of the 2020. Avi, welcome and good to see you.
Good to see you, and thank you so much for your kind words in regards to the book. Thank you.
Avi, when I was following some bio, I learned that you are not only an author, but you are, first of all, a businessman. You are a senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council, what really impressed me. And previously you served in the US Departments of Treasury and Defense. This is interesting, and your comments and articles have appeared in the most influential outlets, including, I think, Foreign Affairs, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. So this is really the top of the best. And what's more, this is the most important for us, for our today's talk, that you are an author of several books. And I would like to point 3 or 4 of them. The first one, Beacon of Hatred, in 2004, then Taint Money in 2009, and my top 2, Iran's Dirty Banking. And this is top 2, and number 1, not only for today, but I think that number 1 of your books is that one, because of which we are talking today. And this is Taushalт, how Israeli ingenuity is repairing, or maybe repairs the world. Maybe this is not the exact name, but title, but we, the shortcut is how Israeli maybe are going to save the world. Maybe it would be a shorter and much more proper title, but originally it was published in 2018, but in Poland it was translated by Dorota Kamińska in 2020, and published by Dialog. This is Dialog Publishing House this year, and in Polish the title sounds I będziesz się rozwijał, izraelska innowacyjność, która zmienia świat. Avi, I am really impressed with that book because I read it recently in Polish, but I know your articles, your papers from the past, and this is really one of, I think, this is not only compliment, but let's start with this, that I really think that this is one of the most important books about Israel, because it's going to, in my opinion, improve the image, but not only improve, but to change. And you are able, because of that book, to show the world that Israel is not only IDF, that Israel, that's not only anti-terror operation, but also a fascinating and inspiring story of really great people. So let's start with the first issue, of the first question. So, I cannot ask, let's say this way maybe, I would like to start with the question, and I must ask you, who and what inspired you, that you once decided to drop everything and to start writing that excellent book?
Agnieszka, first of all, thank you for that very kind introduction. I will only start by saying that there's no single narrative that fully defines the state of Israel. Israel is an extraordinarily complicated, with its own problems between the very rich and the very poor, problems with housing, problems with its neighbors, problems with resource scarcity. Israel is a country full of problems. With that said, one of the stories that I believe that has not been sufficiently told is this story of Israeli technology that is improving the lives of billions of people around the world in the realms of medicine, science, water, agriculture. I will tell you, I myself was not really aware of that story intimately. And my own journey with Israeli technology began in the summer of 2014. Up until that point, as you point out in my bio, I had spent a lot of time looking at terrorism finance. I had looked at terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, like Al-Qaeda. That was where I spent the vast majority of my where I spent the vast majority of my career, really tracking illicit actors and how they abuse the international financial sector and essentially committing acts of violence, nuclear proliferation, etc. In the summer of 2014, I spent the summer in Israel, as I do most summers, with the exception of COVID. I take my children and we go to Israel. And I'll never forget, we left on July the 4th, 2014. I remember that day well because my kids were very angry that they missed the fireworks. Here in the United States, it's the day of it's the National Day of Independence in the United States. And we arrived in Israel, and I was there with my nearly 2-year-old, and I went to enroll him at a preschool. And the owner of the preschool was shocked to see me, and she said, "Mr. Jorisch, what are you doing here?" I said, "I'm here to enroll my child at your preschool. We've spoken, dozens of times, made all the arrangements. I've already paid." She said, "I know, but there's a war that's about to break out between Israel and Hamas. You ought to go home to America where it's nice and safe." Then it was my turn to look at her as if she had grown a second head. I said, "First of all, I am home. And second of all, no one's going to steal my child's birthright. Please enroll him at your school." She did it, albeit reluctantly. And a few days later, as we were driving home from school, I want you to know, as a young parent, I heard the scariest noise of my entire life. I heard on the radio the sound of the code red heralding the beginning of war. And I want you to know, I looked at my sleeping toddler in the back and my stomach turned. I was really sick. I thought, this place is really not safe. It's one thing to come to a war zone as an adult. It's quite another to drag a toddler into a war. And I knew exactly what was coming. And I took him to our apartment, and we did story time, and we did tubby time, and all the things that young parents do. And I put him to bed, but I knew exactly what was coming. And sure enough, 3 hours later, the sirens wailed, instructing all the citizens of Israel to go into the bomb shelter. And I took my terrified nearly 2-year-old down 4 flights of stairs. And I want you to know, there were all of my neighbors, and they looked more terrified than my almost 2-year-old. And we sat there for about 10 minutes in almost complete darkness. And after about 10 minutes, our building violently shook. Agnieszka, do you know what that sound was?
Yes, sirens.
It was the sound of history being made. Up until that moment in time, a missile would go up, and then a missile would come down. Here what we had was a Star Wars moment, the Iron Dome. We had the Star Wars moment. Up until this moment in time, you only saw when a missile went up and another met it in midair and exploded it. We only saw that sort of thing happening in the movie theater in Star Wars. And we heard these 2 loud booms and knew it was safe to go back upstairs. And that was really the beginning of my journey to discover Israeli technology. Over the course of that summer, it was both inspiring and very depressing. On the depressing side, you had terrorists that were running around the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. Hezbollah had a vice grip over the country of Lebanon. You had ISIS that controlled large swaths of territory in Iraq and in Syria. My friend and colleague from graduate school, Steve Sotloff, sadly lost his life that summer when he was beheaded. And it was extraordinarily depressing, and we kept going in and out of bomb shelters. Every few hours we'd go into a bomb shelter. On the other hand, I began to discover that Israeli technology was improving the lives of not only millions, but billions of people in the realms of, as I said, medicine, water, science, agriculture. My gardener was using drip irrigation and started telling me that drip irrigation is used by billions of people. My controller, my CFO, her husband got Parkinson's and basically had 2 electrodes stuck into his brain, and that was helped reduce the symptoms that are associated with Parkinson's. And I discovered that was put in there by a GPS that was created in Israel. And so all of a sudden I realized, wait, there's a whole story, there's a whole world here that I'm not aware of. Now, of course, you know, Agnieszka, that Israel is known as the startup nation. It has more startups combined than Canada, India, Japan, Korea, and the United Kingdom combined. And only down from the United States and China, Israel has the most companies listed on the NASDAQ than any other country in the world, with the exception, of course, of, as I said, US and China. But the interesting thing here is it's not that Israel is only the startup nation, which it is. That fact in and of itself is impressive. In my mind, what's really impressive is that Israel is solving some of the world's gravest challenges, the challenges that will afflict humanity over the course of the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. If you look at the top 10, 20 challenges facing the planet, climate change, energy, water security, food security, poverty, education, energy, you will find an Israeli working to solve that grand global challenge in an effort to make the world a better place. And I was inspired by that story and felt compelled to tell it. And that was the beginning of the journey to interview scientists, interview innovators themselves, professors at the universities, venture capitalists, those that are involved in private equity, the entire business community. What is the secret behind Israel's innovative spirit? And why is Israeli technology, how and why is Israeli technology improving the lives of so many people around the world? Now look, let me be clear. Israel is not the most innovative place on the planet. According to the Bloomberg Index, it's only number 5. Not bad for a country who's only 72 years old. Even so, it was a story that I felt most people were not aware of, including myself, and one that I felt like I needed to tell. Explore and ultimately tell.
Yeah, great. And I have to share the picture of the book in Polish with our guests today. And this is how it looks in for Polish readers. Really very nice and really, I think that when you take it and when you start reading it, it's out of question. You need just one day, maybe 2 days, of a journey via maybe fascinating stories, stories of people, not only ideas, but first of all, peoples. And Avi, the first what I read in your book was about Israeli DNA, because I was wondering, frankly speaking, this is the answer you are offering the readers. What is the root of the success of Israel? Because as you just mentioned, that just imagine Israel, a very, very tiny country. You told several times you just mentioned that Israel is as big as New Jersey. That's true. I might say that Israel is more or less like Mazovian voivodeship in Poland. Maybe even, I don't know, maybe whether it is the best example. But this is really a very small country, what's more, with very few natural resources and with a very small population. Now it's growing, but this is a question of very often immigration. And first of all, surrounded, but frankly speaking, not the best friends. And in such a story, I was wondering, and because of that book, I know the answer. What is what was that spark of that process of becoming, or maybe changing Israel from, pioneer country into not only startup, but as you mentioned, innovation country. So what do you think? Because you are really talking very, very much about all the factors, but can you explain us what is behind the success?
So a few thoughts here just to address some of your points. The first, before I get to the secrets behind Israel's success, I'd like to point out Israel today has 9 million souls, many of whom, interestingly, your readers will find interesting, many of whom came from Poland, have Polish background, myself included. Frankly, many of the innovators that I featured in my book, I was surprised to find out had originally come of Polish heritage. All that is to say that if I'm one of your listeners today, I would take great heart in the fact that many of the people featured in this book have their DNA in Poland, which to me speaks volumes about the country that you reside in today. And second of all, you point out that Israel is surrounded by neighbors that are not its best friends. I'm actually very, very hopeful over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years, and I've been saying this for a long time. I believe that we are going to experience the most verdant, peaceful decade that we've seen in the region yet. Israel has experienced war and terrorism pretty consistently over the course of its 72 years of existence. But what we are seeing today is a region that is changing radically, and a region that is recognizing that the future belongs to countries that innovate. Israel is a leader when it comes to innovation, and as I said, is solving these grand global challenges. Many of the same challenges that you face in Poland, we face in Israel. And the stories that I tell in the book are ones that I believe are directly applicable to Polish society and helping Poland itself solve these challenges that it faces. I was very inspired when I really dug into the secrets behind Israel's success, and I really break it down into 4 secrets. The first is diversity. Israel is one of the most diverse places on the planet. It has Muslims, Christians, and Jews, Muslims of every stripe and every variety, Sunni, Shia, Arab, Circassian, Alavi, Bedouin, you name it, Israel has it. Israel has Christians of every stripe and every variety, Catholic, Protestant, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, across the board. And you have members of the Jewish faith that come from the 4 corners of the earth. I always say that diversity powers the Israeli innovation ecosystem. And if you look at the stories that I feature in the book, you see that most, if not all, of the stories have a large component of diversity. Either it has Muslims, Christians, and Jews working together, or it has Jews from all over the world working together, or a variety of, like, a combination of. That's the first. And I will say in my book I feature 15 stories, and then I believe, truly revolutionized the world and made it a better place. And then there are another 50 in the back. And again, I was surprised by these stories because I myself was not aware of many of them. The second is the idea of secular values. Israel is a country that reveres, puts on a pedestal, its secular institutions. Primarily, all but one of its universities are secular. And its military, the IDF, for the most part, is a secular institution. The third is this idea of failure, and that failure is absolutely necessary in order to succeed in innovation. You cannot succeed unless you fail. It's the yin and the yang. You can't have one without the other. And in Israel, if you have built your company, if you have succeeded for the first time without failure, people look at you like you're a little bit funny. And if you look at government policy, they actually have baked into the funding cycle the necessity to fail. And we can talk about that as we move forward. What are the various programs that Israel has employed? Because I do ultimately believe that Poland could use these programs for their own benefit. If that's something they're interested in, we can talk about that on the rest of the program. And lastly, it's the religious prophetic tradition. And I'd like to talk about that in a very cultural context. Israel has a prophetic tradition. The Jewish people has a prophetic tradition that is roughly 3,900 years old. And if you look back in the scriptures, you have, for the last 2,500 years, roughly, the religious Jews have been praying something called the Elenu Prayer, which instructs us letaken olam b'malachut Shaddai, to repair the world in the image of God. No less than 10 times in the Mishnah, one of the most important Jewish books, it instructs us to engage in tikkun olam, the idea of repairing the world. You look at the prophet Isaiah. The prophet Isaiah calls upon us all to bring more light to the world. This idea of being a light unto the nations, I will tell you, to me personally, doesn't speak to me. And I frankly think it has been not translated correctly. It's the idea of not being a light unto the nations, but rather bringing more light to the world. It really is about bringing light. And that's not only for the Jewish people, that is for all of humanity. And when you start looking at the world in the context of light versus darkness, for me, that really was a sea change. That was a change in how I viewed the world. On Saturday nights, the most important Jewish prayer is Havdalah. It comes after the Sabbath, and the prayer goes as follows, and I'll translate it loosely from the Hebrew. It's a separation between the holiness and the mundane, and between darkness and light. As you go out of the Sabbath and you go into the rest of the week, you are separating between light and darkness. And you cannot repeat the words of curing the sick, feeding the hungry, helping the needy, making the world a better place, day in and day out for thousands of years, and for that not to have a deep impact on the cultural DNA of your people. And the founding fathers and mothers of Israel were deeply inspired by these teachings, including Golda Meir and David Ben-Gurion. Ben-Gurion, 72 years ago, stood at the lectern and called into existence the modern-day state of Israel. He basically said, after 2,000 years of waiting, our moment has finally arrived as the Jewish people. The gates are officially open, and members of the Jewish faith are welcome to. They are welcome to come home at any time. He also said something else. He said, and I quote, "Israel has been granted the great privilege and the obligation to tackle some of the gravest challenges of the 20th century." He seemed to be saying that at the very heart and soul, the most sublime hope of the state of Israel was both to protect and enrich its own citizens, but to also go beyond the borders of the state of Israel and make the world a better place. And I will tell you, Agnieszka, we are seeing that today when Israel is when it's leveraging its best asset, tech, and making it a better place. Today we are seeing that when it comes to, as I said, medicine, water, science, agriculture. We can dive into any of these innovations, but it's truly having an outsized impact on making the world a better place.
Yeah, you are right. And frankly speaking, and now I dare to quote you, Avi, because you wrote in your book that the book introduces the reader to Israelis who exude light into the face of darkness. I really like this sentence. It means much, it's just make our imagination work. And I have to, this is the best moment to share with you the secret that that when I was finishing, the particular chapter, it was always the moment when I was, thinking, wow, it's really amazing story, and it's going to be my favorite in that book. And, such reaction I had 15 times. So you know why? Because you describe 15 stories of 15, let's say, people, very often, from the very side, very ordinary people. But, because of, as you mentioned, the mixture of the cultures, because of the need of, change the world, change the surrounding, they've become really the best innovators. So I would like, this is my private question to you, what is your favorite story in your own book?
As you point out, every one of these stories touched me deeply, and frankly, that was when I looked at these stories, it was very hard for me to choose. There were hundreds, if not thousands of innovations coming from Israel. It was actually extraordinarily difficult to choose which were the 15. And I used the following barometer. Number one, is it highly innovative? 2, is it improving the lives of a significant number of people? And 3, does it inspire me deeply? And I figured if it inspired me, it would inspire you, Agnieszka, and it would inspire the readers. And frankly, I've been very lucky in that today the book has now come out. As of today, in the last 2 years, the book has been translated already into 25 languages, and it is coming out in at least 16 more over the course of the next year. I mean, the book will come out hopefully in over 40 languages, and I'd like to think that the stories have inspired many individuals around the world in their native languages. And my My most sublime hope is that as a reader, it will cause you and others to ask, what can I do to make the world a better place? Now, I don't expect any of the readers to say, I'm going to start the next Amazon, or I'm going to start the next Facebook. That would be great. I would be overjoyed. The truth of the matter is, my hope is that readers will ask themselves, what small step can I take to make the world a better place? And that could be opening the door for someone. That could be visiting someone who's extraordinarily sick. It's one small movement to bring more light to the world is what I hope I inspire our readers to do. For me, I am always inspired by, deeply, by the story of United Rescue. United Rescue is the first story that I feature in the book. So Agnieszka, if I were to have a heart attack right now in Washington, D.C., the average for an ambulance to come to my home would be 22 minutes. That is roughly the average number, give or take, all over the world. In some places more, in some places a little bit less. It also happens to be roughly the number that is in Israel. In a country like Israel that's experienced war and terrorism for 72 years, 22 minutes is a very long amount of time in order to get a medical expert to the scene of an emergency. That is just too long. And so my friend and colleague, Avi Jorisch, he started an organization that has done three things. The first is he brought together 6,000 EMTs, emergency medical technicians, these medical specialists, Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Okay, so he brought them together, and that number increases with every single year, and he ensures that they get proper training. Number two, Agnieszka, when I want to call a cab, we don't pick up the phone anymore. That is so 1975. No one picks up the phone. We all take our little smartphone. Boop, we press a button, and then all of a sudden, Lyft or Uber or Via or Get, one of these apps finds the 5 nearest cabs, and then, boop, one of them magically arrives at my house a few minutes later. It's like magic. Avi Jorisch and his colleagues, they created an app, actually, believe it or not, before the smartphone came out in 2007. They created an application for the phone that geospatially locates the 5 nearest emergency responders and to the scene of a medical emergency and makes sure that they can, and in order to get there, he gives many of them something called an ambucycle, which looks like a Vespa and has a box on the back. And it's like a little, it's not even a motorcycle. It's like a little, like, I'm sure you have pizza delivery in Poland, and they use the same kind of Vespa-like device. It's everywhere in the world. Or if you've been to India, these little Vespa motorcycles. And he created this innovation called the ambucycle, which is half ambulance, half motorcycle. And I'm glad you're sitting down, Agnieszka. What do you think is the national average anywhere in Israel to bring an EMP to the scene of a medical emergency? Do you remember from the book?
No, just let me, just remind me. I remember,
It's 3 minutes anywhere in the country. Anywhere in the country.
Yeah, because I remember, I'm sorry, because I remember you were just describing the story of, a traffic jam in Jerusalem, how, he had to just find not only the road, just go through the traffic jam and save someone who got, I don't remember, it was not a heart attack, but someone, he was maybe bleeding.
Yeah, this was Avi Jorisch. He was originally in ambulances, and he never saved the life of an individual that was in out of an ambulance. He never got there fast enough in order to save a life, and he thought, this is not efficient. This is not effective. And the ambulance is absolutely necessary in order to take a human being and bring them to the hospital. But the golden 3 minutes, in order to save someone's life, it's the first 3 minutes that really count. And so he created first a flash mob of humans that could react. 2, we gave them electronically a way of getting there via their phones. And 3, these ambucycles in order to get there. And so the national average, Agnieszka, is 3 minutes. And it is, in every major city, it's 90 seconds. I don't get to say Scooby-Doo, and literally someone comes to save my life. And it begs the question, this is extraordinary that a country like Israel, it's small, it has 9 million people. Okay, great. You can get to the scene of a medical emergency in 90 seconds. But what is really incredible is that this organization has managed to scale this to a number of countries around the world. In the United States, the first city to roll this out is Jersey City. But there's no reason why we don't have this in every major city around the world. Washington, D.C., Krakow, Warsaw, Moscow, Mumbai, Delhi. We have millions, hundreds of millions of EMTs around the world. Every one of us today has a smartphone, and we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of these little Vespa-type motorcycles that can help us get to the scene of a medical emergency. And so I, for one, love the idea of the story of Muslims, Christians, and Jews working together. I love the idea that you save one life, you can save, it's as if you saved the entire world. I'll share another story with you that I don't normally tell. Just before the pandemic in March, I take my children sometimes to these tech conferences, okay? And one of the conferences that I took them to, Eli Beer was there. This was literally at the beginning of March here in Washington, D.C., and you get on an ambicycle, and he straps on these goggles, so it's virtual reality. And you see yourself like driving, and you get to the scene of an emergency, and you see an EMT like it's a child, and he's doing CPR, and he's saving a life, and then the kid breathes, and it's like I'm like crying my heart out, right? You're like, oh my God, you get there in 90 seconds, you save a child's life. This is the most extraordinary thing. So my oldest child, I brought all three children, and I strap on the virtual reality for all three, right? I now have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and an almost 5-year-old. And my oldest gets off the ambicycle system. He goes, Baba, I don't want to drive a car. I said, come on, why don't you want to drive a car? He goes, Daddy, Baba, I want to ride an ambicycle so I can save lives. And it's one of these stories that whenever we go to Jerusalem, I take my children to United Rescue's headquarters. I want them to see the most sublime hope of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, which is Muslims, Christians, and Jews working together to save lives. Now, some of your readers would say that's sappy. I would say, as I look to the individuals featured in my book, these are the individuals that I want my children and readers to look up to and emulate and inspire them in an effort to make the world a better place. The more light we bring into the world, the better off we all are. I mean, this is a fairly simple concept, and I wish I could say I've come up with it. I didn't. Our prophets have been saying this for thousands of years. Cure the sick, feed the hungry, help the needy, make the world a better place, and each and every one of us now has the great privilege and the obligation to tackle some of the gravest challenges of the 21st century. Now look, we're all today on Zoom. I'm looking at you, you're looking at me. Our readers are eventually going to look at themselves on a Zoom call, and I would say, friends, look at yourself in the mirror. The only people that are going to move the dial on the issues that we care about are you. You're it. I mean, all of us together have this great privilege and obligation to make the world a better place, and so I would inspire our listeners today, I would encourage our listeners today, read the book, be inspired, give it to someone else. Give the book to someone else. Agnieszka, when I come visit you in Poland next year, I don't want to see my book on your bookshelf. Please, give it to somebody else. You would do me the great favor of take the book and give it to somebody else.
I promise, and even I was, before our today's discussion, when I got this book, I just immediately told my students that, guys, did you see this? And now I have not a short list, but the list of the more than 20 people. I promised among my students, I promised just to not only share this book, but just let them read and allow to be inspired by a larger group, not only me and a few readers, but so I'm not going to keep it. I'm going to, let new readers, young people to be inspired, thanks to your book. And I have to share.
And the readers there, it's directly applicable to Poland. This is where I want to really bring in. There are challenges that Poland faces, like every country in the world. Water security, food security. The innovations that I feature in the book are directly applicable to Poland today in terms of what are the problems you face, what are we going to be facing over the course of the next 10, 15 years? So, for example, I'll just look into the future. In 10 years, virtual reality and reality are going to be indistinguishable from one another. They're going to be completely indistinguishable. In the next 10 years, we're going to solve problems like Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and other neurological diseases. In 10 years, We're going to have we're going to have bases on the moon and be on our way to Mars. I mean, these are things this is coming. We're going to experience 20,000 years of human change over the course of the next 20 years. The world is going to look radically different in the next 20 years. My children, your children, the next generation of Poles, we're going to be facing a completely different reality, and we have to be ready. And it's why I always say the world belongs to those countries who innovate. In Poland, as you know better than anyone else, is an extraordinarily entrepreneurial, innovative society. And some of the ideas in my book, I hope, will inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs and innovators.
Mm-hmm. But I don't remember, it was maybe last year, maybe 2 years ago, I was talking to Adam Dangel-Rotfeld, who is the best Ministry of Foreign Affairs ever in Poland. And he's of Jewish origin as well, but, he's well known in Poland because of so-called dialogue with Russia. And when we were with Professor Rotfeld discussing Israeli, let's say, issues, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because of, let's say, a trip to Jordan for a conference, a few years ago he told me just like this, that believe me, the road to peace goes through, let's say, innovations, goes through solving basic problems, not social problems, not political problems, but the basic problems of everyday lives. And maybe it was the moment not everyone was able to imagine how Israeli trials in reducing shortage of water, of something like this, might help bring peace to the Middle East. But the book, and when I read that book, I reminded the words of Professor Rotfeld. It works like this. It was not maybe it was not a prophet, but I believe that this is the real road to peace in the Middle East, and frankly speaking, to making people, as you mentioned, to making world a better place. So this is why we have to think like you, and be inspired and inspire our, let's say, cycle. But when as I told you, I told about this book to my students, and I was discussing with my friends, especially with journalists dealing with international matters, and some of them asked me to share with you their questions, because yes, and and a friend of mine, an excellent journalist, I think the best female journalist in Poland, frankly speaking, Agata Kasprolewicz. Now he works with Darek Rosiak in Raport o stanie świata. This is, the best international publicity in Polish media, and Agata Kasprolewicz was even awarded a few years ago by the biggest Grand Press award. So she's really the top of the best in Poland. And Agata, last year she was working on podcasts about ecology, about new ideas, and so on. And I know that she is a fan of innovations, of Israeli innovations. And Agata asked me to raise a question, maybe not complicated one, but she was wondering that let's say this way, what we see in your book, this is this is a trial to change the image of Israel, what is very good, and to just show people that Israel, show the world that Israel is not only army, as I told you, not only fighting terrorists, but also a very inspiring place. And Agata asked me asked me, she was wondering, how do you think? Is it going to work? Is it, because of today's politics, which is full of hypocrisy, which is full of cynic politicians, which is full of populism? Do you think that you, as an Israeli writer, widespreading a very bright picture of Israel, do you think that you might influence, you might somehow change the picture of Israel, let's say, in the future, and let people think that Israel is much more like you present than like people used to think?
Let me answer that in one of two ways. I'm going to share a story with you. Prime Minister Netanyahu a few years ago was asked after by reporters. They said, Israel does amazing technology. Israel now has the best emergency field hospital in the world. When there's a major emergency that happens in places like Turkey or Haiti or wherever, Israel is the country that gets the first phone call, and it sends its hospital everywhere. And one of the reporters asked the Prime Minister, he says, in the next big emergency, why don't you include a few more reporters and journalists and reporters and photographers to take pictures and tell the story of how great Israel is? The Prime Minister looks at me and goes, what are you, insane? If I have to choose between adding a few more reporters and a few more doctors, I'm going to choose a few more doctors any day of the week. The idea of saving lives it trumps all. And so ultimately, all we can do is do the right thing do the right thing.
Yeah.
My hope and deep desire is that eventually the world comes around. But the truth of the matter is, I'm really not focused on the world. I'm focused on really solving these grand global, at least I for one. I love telling these stories because they inspire. And I hope that the go around will not lie. It is my deep and most sublime hope that these stories do get told, and that the image of Israel does change over society, and that the world does begin to notice, wow, Israel is an extraordinarily complicated place, but there's no denying the fact. There's no denying that it has many, many innovators that are bound together not by religion, money, or stature, but rather a desire to make the world a better place. I, for one, get emails every day from all over the world. And I'm always heartened. I got one just this week. It was incredible. Dear sir, I picked up your book at the Delhi in the Delhi airport. I must note that on page so-and-so it's missing a comma. But I want you to know I was inspired by this story. I love the idea that the book is now I didn't know that the book was in the Delhi the Delhi International Airport, one. But two, I do hope that the world does begin to look at Israel in a different way. But ultimately, more than that, I take great comfort in the fact that Israel is solving these grand global challenges, and I know that ultimately the world will come around. Look, for many years, people were very bearish on what we call the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I've been saying for a long time, Israel's going to make peace. First, my hope is with the Emirates. I was in Saudi Arabia in February, just before COVID. And I was sitting with one of the ministers, and we were discussing innovation and tech. And I said, my deep hope for Saudi Arabia is to come around and basically take its inspiration from the two largest technological superpowers in the region. And he looked at me and goes, okay, obviously I know one of them is Israel. What's the second? And I said, come on, man. It's Dubai. Everyone and he burst out laughing, right? Of course it's Dubai. Of all the peace agreements that Israel could have made in the Arab world today, I am beyond overjoyed, that Israel has managed to structure a peace agreement with the UAE. This, I truly believe, is the beginning of a brand new era of cooperation, of technological innovation. We are seeing today something that was unthinkable even a year ago. Direct flights to Dubai, direct flights to Abu Dhabi, between Abu Dhabi and Tel Aviv, You now have tech conferences that are taking place. Even in the era of COVID, I just saw a video yesterday of a huge tech conference where Israelis have flown in mass to Dubai. I got a text message saying just this morning, "Hey Avi, I'm in Dubai. Where are you?" Everyone in Israel happens to be here this morning, and you think this is not real. Even in the era of COVID, you have people travel. This is beyond exciting, and I am hopeful that the innovations that are featured in my book will slowly but surely find their way to the Arab world and beyond through peace agreements like the ones that Israel has with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Egypt and Jordan and with Sudan. This is only the beginning. The Arab world, and frankly the world, is beginning to understand. We face grand global challenges, like your foreign minister pointed out, and the way to the future is solving these grand global challenges. This is what will unite us as humanity. This is what is going to bring us to a better place. Certainly, as we think about the fact that in 10 years we're going to have bases on the moon, and in 15, 20 years we're going to be on Mars, our children are going to be the first generation that experiences a multi-planet society. That is beyond mind-boggling. And this is just the beginning. For better or for worse, I asked my 5-year-old, I said, Yaniv, we're only, by the time you're 15, in theory, you could go to the moon. He goes, Daddy, I don't want to go to the moon. I want to stay right here with you, unless you come with me, right? Like, this is one of these, I'll share another wonderful story. Right before I went to Saudi Arabia, just as I was kissing and hugging my oldest child, we had conversations about some of the problems that Saudi society faces, and he wanted to know why I was going to Saudi Arabia. And there was a whole conversation in the house in terms of the challenges that Saudi Arabia faces, and human rights and women's rights, and the role of the Jewish people, and making peace, and all the rest of it. It was a very, very interesting conversation. And as I'm walking out the door, I said, Aiden, I hope one day you'll be able to join me on a trip to Saudi Arabia in seeing our cousins. He says to me, he goes, Daddy, they are not our cousins. I said, Aiden, they are our cousins. He goes, no, Daddy. If you look at the Torah, if you look at the Bible, they are our brothers. I look at this, and he goes, and he says, I really want to come. And my hope is that my children, and that Palestinian children and Saudi children and children of the Emiratis and Bahrainis and Sudanese, we will, in the not too distant future, I will be able to visit their children's homes, and meet their children, and vice versa. It is my most sublime hope that that members of Saudi Arabia, citizens of Saudi Arabia, of Oman, of Yemen, Iraq, Qatar, etc., will visit me in my home in Jerusalem, and vice versa, and I will be able to visit them in their homes in those various countries.
Yeah, this is what I believe in, really, frankly speaking. And I know that even my Jordanian friends, they always repeat that conflict might end one day. And finally, all of us will live in a normal countries in the Middle East. So this is the first step to normalization, not only relations between Israel and Arab countries, but to make Middle East normal. Let's say normal region. So Avi, I have still a few questions, and I am afraid that we are going to maybe not to go to the end very soon. But let me ask you once again, and once again is going to be a question of my friend Michał Żakowski. He is a journalist on Polish radio. And he's covering Middle Eastern matters. And of course, he asked me, Aga, please ask Avi, because he's interested in politics and security. And he asked me just to share with you his maybe not worries, but a general question. And this is the request of your assessment, because whatever is happening in Israel, by the way in Poland as well, is biased to politics and to security. And how do you think how security needs, how long they will prevail in innovation, and maybe one day
civilian needs might become, might give the direction, yes, might direct the path of innovation. So how do you think, what is the balance between security innovation and civilian ones?
I don't have an answer to your friend's question, but here's what I do know. We have seen a tremendous amount of innovation that has come out of the military, that the byproduct of that has been making the world a better place. Ironically, let's just go through a few of the innovations that I feature in the book that have come out of the military, and let's think. I'd like to share the secret of why, because most people don't actually understand why. So I'll just take two examples. One is the emergency bandage. The emergency bandage is a very special bandage that was used originally before it was commercialized. Think of a tourniquet, right? You generally twist, and done. The bandage really hasn't been innovated for the last 100 years or so. And the Israeli military, what they did was they would take, first of all, they would take this tourniquet, they would take a stick, put a rock, twist. It wasn't very sterile, it wasn't very nice. And here comes in one of my colleagues, Bernard Bar-Natan, and he innovated this emergency bandage, which today is standard issue, obviously in the Israeli military, in NATO, Australia, New Zealand, the United States. It is a very, very well-received bandage, obviously came out of the military, and is now saving lives all over the world. The other, as I love, is the pill cam. The pill cam is the size of a vitamin, and there's a very high-end camera inside, and humans now, instead of having a colonoscopy, which is used through the rectum, you take a little pill, and it basically, you swallow it, it goes on your insides, and it takes, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of pictures, and it identifies any of the problems in your esophagus, your small intestine, your large intestine, your stomach, so on and so forth. The innovator behind that innovation came out of the Israeli military industry, and he imagined a rocket going off into space, which is what he specialized in, and at the tip of the rocket, instead of it blowing up, it had a camera in there that took pictures of everything. And we are seeing a tremendous number of innovations and these are just two. I could go on. The secret of why, many point to the secret of Israel being the military producing a lot of tech. Israeli technology relies on the military to some degree, in large part because of those that come through. The education in Israel, the education system in Israel is not very good. This is not one of the bright spots of the country. K-12 education, not good in Israel. The Israeli military, because the country is so small, has the pick of the litter. It can choose whoever it wants, and it tracks everyone, and it chooses the best of the best, and it puts it in its amazing programs. And for those of your listeners who have read Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this idea that anyone who passes the very basic threshold of intelligence, very, very basic, and you add 10,000 hours, there's nothing they can't do. There's literally nothing human beings can't accomplish as long as you have basic intelligence plus 10,000 hours. Now take Israel. You have these students that are now high achieving. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, brings them in. It lets them play with the big boy toys for 10,000 hours. And then they go out and they start their companies, and they do a tremendous amount of good for the world. And so both tech coming out of the military today is improving the lives of people around the world. But in addition, those that go through the program and get 10,000 hours and start their own companies in a wide variety of fields are truly today improving the state of humanity.
Yeah, you see, this is the perfect combination. Security and civilian needs. It should work. It should really work like this. Avi, I cannot skip that question because once you inspired me, and not only me, but I am more than sure that everyone who is listening to us. So just share with us, maybe it's not a secret, what the next book is going to be about.
So I do have another book in the works. I'm delighted to report that I'm just finishing it. I'm just about to give it to the publisher.
Oh.
I look at I look at the future, and I look at, first of all, it specifically looks at the next 20 years. What are the challenges? First of all, what is the history of the future? What do the next 20 years look like? Number one. Number two, what are the grand global challenges that we face? We all know what they are. We all know that it is water security, food security, poverty, education, space, artificial intelligence, security, education, so on and so forth. And I choose, it is a global book about global innovation that both looks at the grand global challenges and one innovation, country, individual venture that is fundamentally moving the dial on solving that grand global challenge. And I hope that it will, again, leave readers inspired with the idea of we have the great privilege and the obligation to tackle these grand global challenges. Yes, we can do it. Yes, we can. And yes, we must, both for our sakes and for the sake of our children and our children's children, because there is no plan B. This is our home. The planet Earth is the perfect vessel. Yes, we will go beyond the planet Earth eventually, but for the time being, there's no planet B. And frankly, the idea of making the world a better place is one that inspires me. But in order to get there, we must solve these grand global challenges. There's no way around it. We are seeing an unprecedented era of connectivity, of the rising middle class, and an era where we are experiencing tremendous change environmentally. And in order to tackle those challenges, we must use our ingenuity. This is not a book about Israel, it is a book about the world, but I am confident, and I know, having written Thou Shalt Innovate, that if you look at these, I happen to write about the 13 there are today 13 grand global challenges. The UN calls them the SDGs, the development goals, basically, that we are facing. And those 13 challenges, Israelis are helping solve them today. But we're definitely seeing other places around the world that are solving them. The United States, India, Poland, Holland. There are amazing innovations that come out that I feature and that I hope will also inspire another generation of individuals.
You see, I might just say amen and wish you not only luck, but just to make just your book become really a global bestseller, because I can't imagine the issue which might be more important and more fundamental than how to create the future, because very often we think too much about the past. Past is very important, but we shouldn't forget that we should think mostly and predominantly about the future.
The best way to shape the future is to do it ourselves and to make it ourselves, and we have this amazing ability to do it.
Yes, of course. And Avi, just promise me, this is not blackmailing, but promise me, I'm just trying to, to get your promise that next time after publishing your book, you will be Polish friendly, let's say this way, and you allow to publish your new book also in Poland, and that one day, maybe in very, very close future, we will talk once again about your new book.
It would be my great pleasure to come to Poland and see you in person. I was in Poland, I will tell you, 3 years ago, and I have very warm memories of my trip. I'm only sorry that we are not in person in order to launch the book. When COVID is behind us in the months to come, hopefully we will experience a vaccine that is widely spread in the weeks and months to come. I hope that you and Dialog and the Israeli embassy will invite me to Poland, and it was my great pleasure to come. And certainly for my next book, I would be absolutely overjoyed for it to be published in Polish.
Yes, this is not Plan B. This is Plan A for
This is Plan A for sure.
Yes, Avi and friends, it was really a privilege to talk to you. It was a huge pleasure to read your book, first of all. Thank you for inspiring us, not only me, but us. And thank you for being with us today. It was, Avi, really a great time. Thank you very much.
Agnieszka. Thank you. May you continue to stay safe and healthy, and may the situation in Poland only improve in Poland and around the world. May we see each other very, very soon, Agnieszka. The pleasure was all mine.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.